I know there's a bunch of mechanical ways to help prevent fasteners from loosening up, but when I want to be absolutely sure, I use Loctite, and usually the blue or the red formulas. I'm loading this bolt up with a big nut and washers so I can tighten the nut down against it and make sure there's no give. Then I'll torque the nut to 40 foot-pounds. Now I'll try loosening the nut and see that it takes just over 30 foot-pounds to break it free. And now we're going to apply a little bit of the blue 242 Threadlocker. Just a couple of drops on the threads where the nut's going to go is all it takes. And I just let it run down the threads until I put the nut on. Threading the nut on distributes the Loctite evenly on the bolt. And we'll use the torque wrench to tighten this nut down against the washers and nut on the bolt. Then I'll torque the nut down to 40 foot-pounds and let it sit for 24 hours for the Loctite to cure. Now with the Loctite cured, it takes about 40 foot-pounds to break the nut free. Perhaps even more important is that after we break it free, it takes about 5 or 10 foot-pounds of torque to turn the nut. And that 5 to 10 foot-pounds of torque remained pretty constant as I turned the nut off of the bolt. Even when the nut was partially off of the bolt, the Loctite still had a firm enough grip that I couldn't turn it by hand. Finally, with a bunch of the nut off of the bolt, it finally got to where I could turn it by hand. I think this is an important feature of the blue Loctite. Even though it is removable, that constant drag on the fastener means that they're just not going to back out on their own. And after you take the fastener apart, the Loctite comes out of the threads easily with the awl. After cleaning up the same nut and bolt, I'm going to apply some red 271 Loctite. This is a much stronger, more permanent type of Loctite, but it goes on the same way. I put a couple of drops on the threads and then run the nut on. I want to compare the strength of the red Loctite, so we're going to go ahead and torque this fastener down to 40 pounds also. After the red Loctite had cured, I tried breaking the nut free, and the torque wrench got up to 60 pounds, and I quit then. The instructions say to release the red Loctite, we have to heat the fastener up to about 500 degrees. And that's not tough to do with a propane or MAP cylinder. And when it's heated up, the nut breaks free easily. What's different about the red Loctite is once the nut is backed away from the washers, I can turn it off by hand. And I remembered to use the gloved hand when I did this. There is a little bit of residue left on the threads, but those are easily wire brushed off and you can reuse the fastener. If you're one of the normal people in the world and have had a fastener come loose when you didn't want it to, you need to think about using Loctite.